This is Raythe from Raythe Reign. I'm an author of serialized gay romance fiction. Every week on this podcast, I'll be reading a chapter from one of my gay fantasy shifter serials called Raythe Reign. I'll explain at the break how you can find out more about this story and others I write. So let's get to it. Chapter 105. Overheard Conversations. Caden found Rose and Wally with his parents on his family's balcony. They were all sitting together having wine and appetizers. In a way, it was good that they were all together. That meant he would not have to repeat this terrible news twice. He and Valerius hadn't discussed who would tell Landry's parents about her death. He doubted that they would want him to relay the news. Her parents were humans first, after all, and he was the 9th dragon shifter. He didn't want to add to their pain, even if that was because they were prejudiced against him. Laughter drifted out to him as he closed the doors of the tower suite and stood silently in the lobby. He and Iolaire just listened to them.
And then I shifted to my rat forms and carried all the defective plushies into the dude's house. I hid them like everywhere, behind his walls, up in the rafters, in the ventwork, Wally was saying. And since they were moldy and smelled, which was the problem to begin with, I hear the bastard is going crazy, tearing up his house. He finds one plushie here and another there. He thinks he's got them all, but nope. The smell and mold patches come back. And I make sure he never does get all of them, as I return every few weeks and tuck a few more in there. Iolaire let out a wheeze of what had to be dragon laughter. Its eyes sparkled with amusement. Caden grinned and just barely repressed a bark of his own. "Oh my goodness, Wally," his mother laughed. "That's terrible. I shouldn't laugh." "He was the one that sold him the defective goods in the first place, Ellen," his father said, totally deadpan. "All Wally was doing was returning them." "Exactly," Wally cried, and Caden imagined the wisps of black hair in his head waving wildly. "I take it we aren't selling any plushies from him anymore?" Rose asked dryly. "Hell no. If a man can't supply a good plush, he's no good to me," Wally harumphed. Iolaire reminded Caden of the little girl who had made him have the white and black dragon plushies kiss. "Do dragons kiss, Iolaire?" Caden asked it. Iolaire tucked its head under one wing, almost shyly, and then showed him an image of Iolaire and Razio with their foreheads pressed together. "So that is dragon kissing." "It's beautiful. Nothing to be embarrassed about," Caden assured his spirit. Iolaire drew its head out of its wing and blew snow up in the air. The glittery flakes fell all around its snow-white body. "Are you excited to start your new job with Justice St. John, Mr. Bryce?" Rose asked after chuckles turned to silence. "Grant, please, Rose," his father reminded her with an indulgent chuckle. "But yes, I'm actually excited about the law again. I haven't felt this in..." Caden imagined him glancing affectionately over at his mother as his father ran the years back in his head. "Well, a very long time." "He's been so unhappy, Iolaire," Caden mused. "I didn't truly realize it." Well, maybe I did. But there was nothing I could do." Iolaire nodded its large head and let out a soft, whistling breath of agreement. "There are so many good things about us joining, but I have to say that I didn't think of my dad getting a better job being one of them," he told the spirit. "You'll have the ear of the Supreme Court itself." Wally sounded a bit awed. "As powerful as the dragons are, since Valerius lets the laws mean something, you'll be having even more of an effect on this territory than Caden even." "I don't know about that," his father said, but his tone clearly showed he was chuffed about the compliment. Caden didn't bridle at this talk at all. He was glad to share the burden of leading people with the court and his father, even if they were to solve the problem of the behemoth. That still left the very real problems of inequality and prejudice to deal with. Would there ever be a time when there wasn't an us versus them society? He used to think that there was a lot more tolerance than there actually was. He'd been protected from so much of it because it wasn't aimed at him, so he could ignore it happening to others. But now he couldn't ignore it. He wouldn't ignore it. He had to become an advocate. But other than treating people as they should be treated and being an example of that as much as he could, listening to others who had something legitimate to say,
speaking up when he saw injustice and urging his fellow dragon shifters to do the same, well, he didn't feel it was enough. But what other solutions were there? One couldn't rule people into feeling a certain way, and if one did, that led to problems all of its own. So he was definitely glad for the court and for thoughtful people like his father and Justice St. John to be on it. He was grateful that he would have Wally and Rose to advise him. There were plenty of ideas out there, potential solutions. He just had to find them, listen to them, and promote the people and ideas that would help and not hurt. You've been getting calls from the faith all night, Mrs. Ellen. Rose changed to his mother's first name mid-sentence. What are they asking you? Caden knew that Rose was curious, but he had a feeling that she was also asking on his behalf, as a counselor, and not just as his mother's friend. They want to meet Caden, of course, his mother said, sounding a little overwhelmed with this very private part of her life becoming so public. She paused a moment, and he imagined her drinking down her wine, the splash of liquid in a glass that followed soon after, that silence, and her murmured, "Thank you, Grant," told him that he was right. I don't mind that, the excitement, you know. If I knew someone whose child became the 9th dragon shifter, I would be pressing for a moment to speak to him or her too. You don't know if you can trust them. Rose filled in with what he was sure was a knowing nod. The people who helped plant the bombs at that celebration in the Blow, they were so unassuming, so nice. I would have never thought that they would do something so evil, his mother said, and he imagined her shivering after saying words that she meant.
I suppose it just goes to show that we can't assume we know what's in anybody's heart, Wally opined.
Exactly. His mother set her glass a little heavily on the table, and there was a clack. They were so convinced of the rightness of what they believed to remember Iolaire. In a quiet, crazy way, Caden remarked with a bitter twist of a smile. Humans first think they're right too. They shout it to the heavens. Iolaire hooted softly, and its head hung a little. It showed him the images of 2 opposing forces. Both sides were decked out in beautiful armor, flying equally lovely flags with their faces lifted up to the sun, believing it was shining more brightly on them. Then the clash began, and the battlefield was stained red with blood that flowed equally from both sides. And the blood was the same, no matter which side spilled it or which side bled. Then there was a dark shadow that covered the battlefield. Everyone looked up to see what it was. They wiped sweat and blood from their eyes. They blinked as the darkness blocked out the sun that they had thought shone just for them. Their expressions went from weary puzzlement to shock, then to terror. The behemoth flew above them all. Some dropped their weapons and tried to flee from the field, but the behemoth's many heads sent floods of icy waters to drown them, and poisonous fogs to choke them, and flames to fry the flesh from their bones. No one was spared, no matter what the side. No one was safe. The behemoth wanted war and chaos and fed upon it. It was the only victor. Is that all it wants, Iolaire? Caden pressed. Your mind was linked to its mind for a time. He recalled all too keenly how Iolaire had woken up during the other dragon's attack on the behemoth. He didn't want to cause Iolaire pain by asking it to remember that time, but maybe there was something in those memories that could help them defeat it. Death, Iolaire whispered, and tucked its head in its wing again. Its voice was more like a mist being blown through Caden's mind than an actual word. Death. Caden frowned deeply. He wasn't sure if Iolaire was truly answering him or just giving him its impression of the behemoth. He did not press, not now at least. The wall and its raw emotional pain was still too present. How can I know if these people are good or evil? His mother was asking the others. How can I advise Caden to meet with any of them when one of them or more of them could believe as those bombers did? There must be some connection between these people, his father said with a half growl. His father was ever practical. Caden could easily see him working with Esme to discover some faint trace of a network, a single thread that connected them all. Was there such a thing?
Likely they work in independent cells, Wally said. They aren't like a criminal organization. They're terrorists. So what they want are true believers all over the place who act when they are told to, not before, not after. They need to appear normal and the last people on earth one would expect.
So, if anyone appears too normal, I should suspect them, Wally? Despite the still raw worry in his mother's voice, there was amusement there, too.
Well, that could actually work.
Caden could imagine the little rat shifter's shoulders lifting.
They wouldn't want someone who stood out.
But Caden will have to meet with one or more of them at some point, and they can't all be weirdos, though, Rose said carefully. Most of the faith are a little different, excluding you, Ellen. His mother chuckled. Not a fan of the faith, Rose? They aren't really a fan of me. Swarm shifter, remember? They think that certain shifters mean a person is bad, Rose reminded his mother. His mother sighed. Yes, some do think that. It's an ugly side of the faith, and if I must lead, I will go after that part. Though, perhaps we should just dismantle the faith altogether. Perhaps it is doing more harm than good, feeding these fever dreams of spirits joining with every human being. Did you know that you can get some of my gay romance books for free? Every month, I have at least one book free to download, right from Amazon, so you can easily read it on any device. But these books can only be free for 5 days at a time. If you don't want to miss out, just sign up for my mailing list, and I'll send you an email whenever there's a free book available. The link to the sign-up form is in the description down below. Ellen. Caden pictured his father putting one hand over his mother's. There are good people in the faith, far more than any of these misguided individuals. People will always want to believe in something. The spirits are. Well, they stand for good things, his father continued. And even if the faith could be outlawed, which it really couldn't legally anyways, something else would spring up to take its place, something likely unsanctioned too, and even more radicalized. Not to mention the people who believe that blowing others up is necessary for some upcoming war will continue to believe that, regardless of the faith's existence or not. His mother sighed heavily. I know, but I don't know if I could live with myself if I introduced Caden to someone who might hurt him.
We live in a world with criminals everywhere, Ellen,
Wally said solemnly, considering he had been a criminal kingpin before hanging up his crown for that of a legit businessman. Wally would know all about that.
But we still make friends with people. We still fall in love. We still get married. We don't lock our doors and never interact with anyone. Life is about risk, because the good people and the good moments make it all worth it.
His mother's voice sounded a little teary-eyed as she said, Thank you, Wally. That was beautiful. I don't know why this has hit me so hard. Because our son is now at the center of some kind of international conspiracy? Grant responded dryly. His mother must have poked him as he let out an oomph before amending, because your membership in the faith was something that gave you peace and happiness. Now, it doesn't. It seems more fraught than anything else. Those I've spoken to want me to take a leadership role. We've talked about the fact that I should, but I need to get my head on straight before I do that, his mother said. I need to make peace somehow with the fact that there are those in and outside the faith that want to take advantage of Caden. I have to be savvy enough to help him avoid these people. He'll trust my judgment, at least a little bit. Caden went a little rigid. Iolaire's ears flickered. He thought that his father would agree, and then Wally and Rose would stick up for him being more adult than his parents thought. But that was not how it went. His mother continued, Caden has shown such grace through all of this, really. His good heart looks for reasons to give people second chances. And I think that inspires a whole lot of people. The way he's really come into his own so quickly has been amazing to see, his father agreed. Now that I can look at him a little more objectively, I can see what a remarkable job he's doing at it. He could hear the smile in Rose's voice as she said, Caden's a natural. I was so jaded when he and I first met. I'm still jaded, but I used to believe that there was no goodness in the world. Now that I see that there is some, anyways, Caden keeps showing me it. Oh, Rose, You'll add to that goodness, and it'll follow you wherever you go, his mother said, and he imagined her reaching across the table to take Rose's hand. I'm so glad I met all of you. Rose now sounded a little teary-eyed. Iolaire let out a purr. Caden grinned. Time to join them, I think, Iolaire. Iolaire hooted. He took a deep breath and went through the foyer and living room out onto the balcony. His mother caught sight of him first and smiled broadly. Caden, you're back. She hadn't been told where he'd been and what he'd found. He'd made Tilly keep that promise, and she appeared to have honored it. Would she become his counselor when she grew up? He was starting to think he'd be lucky to have her. Where did you head off to, Caden? His father asked, looking happier and more mellow than he had in months, maybe years. Without the pressure and unhappiness of his law firm career hanging over him, the impression he had earlier of his father seeming younger looked to be spot on. The Grey Mountains, Caden said, and sat on the chair that Wally pulled over to the table for him. Wine? Wally offered. Caden nodded. You've got to try these cheese puffs. They're like crack, Rose told him as she shifted a tray of little souffle-like balls towards him. Caden popped one of those into his mouth and chewed appreciatively. He immediately took a handful more. Rose was right. But his expression soon soured as he thought of telling them about Landry. He had a hard time swallowing the last cheese puff. You look like you have something on your mind, kid, Wally said after studying his face. Is this a counselor matter? His mother lifted an eyebrow as if she was willing to take his father's arm and leave the three of them alone. No. I mean, yes. But I want you two to stay to hear it, he told them. Every word felt like a boulder that he was pushing uphill with his tongue. How could he tell them that Landry was dead? It would make it real. I saw helicopters taking off, Rose mentioned. Her expression was studiously neutral. Going towards the Grey Mountains, I think. Did something, happen there? Caden sat down and wiped suddenly damp palms over his jeans. Yeah. We found a human's first hideout in the mountains. There were murmurs of surprise all around. Rose's forehead furrowed. Wally's mustache twitched. But the Grey Mountains are sacred to Valerius. His mother wrung her hands together. Surely they couldn't have thought they'd be safe from discovery there. Caden wondered at the arrogance and risk they all took, the behemoth included. But Valerius had not found the wall. There was nothing to alert him to it. Until yesterday, he had no idea things such as the wall existed. Once more, Caden was glad that he and Iolaire had bonded. This had spurred Anwar to visit and tell the other dragon shifters about what he'd found. It might have been months or years before he'd done that otherwise. If he did it at all, Caden thought. Caden pressed his lips together to stop them from trembling. His mind offered him that image of Landry's questing hand. Had she been trying to ward something off? Or maybe she'd been trying to grab hold of something to stop herself from being dragged inside the wall. We also found a wall, he said, and though the word wall likely hadn't ever frightened any of them before, he saw that his tone caused them all to draw inward, as if to protect themselves from what he had to say next. This is a special wall. And he told them all that he knew, reminding them about the wall in Anwar's territory and the terrible things that had happened there, about the battle with the behemoth, about their suspicions of what it was doing to stir up more trouble. Finally, he spoke of Celestine and her falcon shifters heading over to the next pass from Valinor. He told them of only her return and what she'd said. Well, death. He explained how he and Valerius had gone to that valley and found what was hidden there, a wall of death. And then he told them about Landry. Caden stared down at his hands as he spoke. He didn't want to see their faces. He heard sharp intakes of breath. His mother suppressed a sob. His father gave out a pained gasp. Wally openly cried. Even if she was with humans first, no one should go like that, his mother whispered hoarsely. He knew that his mother's view of Landry had changed since she was ostensibly working for people that wanted to hurt and use Caden and Iolaire. You think she's cunt too, Mom? He asked. She opened her mouth, likely to say, Of course. But maybe seeing something in his own face, she turned that into, I don't know. But it would seem likely, wouldn't it?
Poor kid.
Wally brought out a large handkerchief and blew his nose with it. It honked like a horn, and there were muted smiles all around.
She took a bad path. I truly believe she would have found her way back.
Me too, Caden murmured. He realized as he said it that he meant it. He believed Landry, if she hadn't been planning a double cross on humans first, would have come around. He knew she had wanted to spare her brothers. Were her brothers in the wall too? But the kind of violence that Jasper Hawes was intent on using to harm others wasn't in her. She would have broken with them. Eventually. But there was no more time for her. Unless a miracle could release her from the wall. Rose was the only one silent throughout this, but she'd hardly known Landry, and what she had known wasn't good. But when Caden dared to look up at her, her eyes were distant and she was chewing her lower lip. She caught his gaze. Caden, was there anything special about this wall? She asked almost sharply. Both appeared to be of white stone, like something you'd see in a Greek temple. She'd finished for him. Yeah. Why do you ask that? I mean, other than seeing Anwar's video. I thought it was a coincidence. I mean, it's a blank wall. But if the wall in Anwar's desert and the wall in the mountain are the same, it can't be a coincidence. It must be significant. She bit her lower lip so hard that it bled. You've seen one of these walls, haven't you, Rose? Caden asked her as he felt a cold horror building in his stomach. Rose must have seen another one of those walls in Valerius's territory, maybe even around Reach. His impression was that she didn't really leave the city, but maybe she had seen one in the surrounding countryside, or... I saw one. I'm sure of it, she said. There were even things sticking out of it. I thought they were just carvings, though. Where did you see it? His father brought out his phone and located a map of Reach and the areas around it. You don't understand, Rose said as she tapped on the city itself until a map of the interior of the city showed up. It's here. It's in Reach, in the below. I hope you're enjoying Dragon's Reign so far. Dragon's Reign is free for you to enjoy, but not free for us to make. There is a whole team working with me for audio editing, artwork, graphic design, and custom music. Most YouTube channels and podcasts have sponsors and take ads, but because of the kind of content we make, we can't run ads or get sponsors. Instead, we have other ways you can support me and the team behind this gay romance audiobook. One easy way is to buy or borrow my books from Amazon. They are all gay romance set in alternative worlds with vampires or shifters and other magical beings. You may not know that even if you borrow books with your Kindle Unlimited subscription at Amazon, they are free for you, but they still earn us money. The books are published under the name Ex Aratare, which actually means Raythe in Romanian. And if you love audiobooks, you can get professionally narrated versions of every one of my books on audible.com. The link to my author page is in the description below, as well as to the first book of the series I think you'll really like. Thank you so much for your support. People like you enable me and the team to keep writing these stories of gay romance, magic, monsters, and true love, and producing this very fun podcast for everyone. Thank you.